Hey everybody. So once again I'm coming at you without any plans and just gonna chat with you a little bit. I want to talk with you about this great narrative, and I want to break it down for you in a way that I hope speaks to you as clearly as my explanation of The Dancing Nurses once did. So we're gonna give this a shot. So what I'm talking about here, if you remember The Dancing Nurses, I asked you all a question. What was my question? It was, what story are we telling? Now, a lot of people think, and this is a mistake, that there is this partition between the arts and the sciences. And let's take a walk. I'm doing this impromptu. Hello, love. I need about 10 minutes. And we're going to discuss this together. So remember, the dancing nurses were a phenomenon that seemed to happen kind of oddly organically, but it wasn't. It made you feel creepy. Something wasn't right. People kept arguing and saying, what's wrong with spreading joy and positivity? But what if I told you that that was a weaponized form of joy, or fake, or entirely intended to do something which, as we all know, was a sort of hypnotic mass formation of activity. So, what do I mean by activity? Well, activism is a form of frantic activity. It's relatively hypnotic. There's a rather, one might even say it is the new opiate of the masses. See what I did there? So what is Social Realism? I keep mentioning it. Social Realism. I keep talking about it over and over again. You're getting sick of it. Well, Socialist Realism or Social Realism is actually postmodern theory, repackaged. Therefore, it's also queer theory, race theory, every other theory you can think of is Social Realism. Now I'm going to show excerpts from two texts today we're going to talk about. One is this one. This is the first. The author, Abram Tertz, was an anonymous Russian writer. He went to the Gulag for this. He wrote a satire, similar in the style of Jonathan Swift and other writers at the time, and it's very powerful. But I'm also going to touch on the introduction. The other text that I'm going to share with you all, and this one's fun. So, this plot line, this way of viewing this world, this way of creating this style or mode or morality, whatever you want to call it, should not seem that striking to you. No, if you're an American and you don't have much experience with the arts, it might seem very foreign, but if you're fighting this culture war and refusing to see that culture has anything to do with it, you're simply more attached to activity than truth, frankly. And let's use Christianity as an example. How was Christianity in part spread throughout the world? It wasn't just through people going and, proselytizing. It was through art. And this can be a wonderful thing. Camille Paglia talks about this, right? The Renaissance artists, beautiful works that came up throughout the period of the heyday of Rome, post-Rome. Even those people who subscribe to QAnon keep being told how important symbols are, right? It's interesting that the only form of acknowledgement to artistic modalities is coming through politics. Politics is not art. There is an art to politics. But it's very convenient to think that you're not dealing with something that is utilizing the same methodology. People keep saying this is a spiritual war. They'll even say that this is bad magic. Well, okay, fine. Let me spell it out for you. Yes, there's a spell. It's a spell. So how do you break it? Well, first, you got to know what's happening. Like, let's pretend we're all back in, the school of magic with Harry Potter. You have to learn the principles. Like, what are the core principles that we're dealing with? So, one thing I'll tell you about the arts is something simple, and we're talking here about the fine arts. Art is purposeless. Art is useless, which is what makes it so important. Ionesco said, if you cannot understand the use of the useless, you can't understand art. And if you can't understand that, you can't understand totalitarianism. Totalitarianism uses the very same forms to get in here. For those Christians out there listening to this, if it sounds a little bit like the Antichrist, it should. It's very Luciferian. It is dark magic. It's very deceptive. And half the time, if not more, it wants to create a feverish activity in you to distract you from what's really going on. And to make you think that you're helpless to stop it. That your personal relationship to Creator doesn't exist. That you are inseparable and unthinkable outside of a collective. It's pretty dark. It's a dark black pill. But it's a lie. It's not true, but it's a very convincing story. So, we're going to start with the introduction from 1959 by a guy named Czeslaw Milosz on Socialist Realism by Abram Tertz. This was a publisher's note that says, on Socialist Realism is regarded as the theoretical companion and justification of the imaginative world presented in Abram Tertz's novel, The Trial Begins. And I'll skip over this. So, the essay which follows was written in the Soviet Union and sent by its author through friends to Paris asking that it be published. Now, know one thing, he did end up in the Gulag for this. It came out first in 1959 in a French translation in the Paris Monthly Esprit. We need have no doubt about its authenticity. We're going to jump ahead for a moment. And he explains how to know that this person is real. And in history, we look back, we know he's real because he ended up in the Gulag. Now, then he starts explaining what the heck he's talking about. He says, some Americans may believe that socialist realism or SOC realism, S-O-C, same root as sociopath, sociology, society, SOC, S-O-C, socialism. It's a shame we don't learn our ancient languages anymore. War on memory, baby. It ain't no joke. And if you watch that Tucker interview, you realize it really ain't no joke. What did they say? That vaccine made it so that for every new memory, you have to destroy and obliterate an old one? And listen, it's not hopeless. There's things you could do about it, but I told you, it's a war on memory. Some Americans may believe that socialist realism, or SOC realism as it is called, is nothing more than a style applied in the literature of art of the Soviet Union. And we're back. Sorry about that. Some Americans may believe that socialist realism, or SOC realism, as it is called, is nothing more than a style applied in the literature and art of the Soviet Union and in those areas to which its influence extends. A style which bears witness to the 19th century tastes of bureaucrats for wedding cake architecture, for flat colors in paintings, and for plush luxury. That anyone who opposes this system of aesthetics is committing a political offense might appear fantastic. Not so much anymore, right? It's not so fantastical now. But unfortunately, SOC realism is not merely a question of taste. It is a philosophy, too, and the cornerstone of official doctrine worked out in Stalin's days. SOC realism is directly responsible for the death of millions of men and women. For it is based on the glorification of the state by the writer and the artist, whose task it is to portray the state as the greatest good, or the power of the state as the greatest good, and to scorn the sufferings of the individual. It is thus an effective anesthetic. I wasn't kidding about the opiate masses, was I? Beware those that long to be numb, my friends. The inferiority of poetry, novels, plays, and pictures produced in accordance with this formula cannot be avoided, since reality, which is quite disagreeable, has to be passed over in silence, in the name of an ideal, in the name of what ought to be. However, such an inferiority does not prevent and indeed facilitates the extension of this kind of influence, of this kind of mass culture. The battle against Socialism is therefore a battle in defense of truth, and consequently in defense of man himself. Says later, the problem of Socialism is much less simple than it might appear at first sight. Despite many attempts, the elements which constitute its theory have never been combined into a harmonious whole. In fiction, the division of characters into good guys and bad guys is required as it is in any Western. The hero is allowed to have some doubts and to make some mistakes, but good must finally triumph. Yet this good does not mean morality based on the Ten Commandments, but rather, and simply, the individual's conformity with the communal aim. And this aim is the victory of the revolution throughout the world. But since victory can be obtained only by a state led by party, or rather, the party, the aim is everything which assists the party to increase the state's industrial, military, and other strength. So the norms of individual behavior are not to be found within an individual, but are determined from without. The subjective honesty of a man who, motivated by moral impulses, might condemn the use of tanks in Budapest. This is in reference to the 1956 uprising against the Soviets, by the way. Does not lessen his objective guilt, for the independence of Hungary would be at variance with the interests of the Soviet Union, and hence with the interests of revolution, therefore of all mankind. So, what the heck are they talking about? So they say that parody is a game. Satire is a lesson. There was a time that a lot of people were very familiar with satire. Jonathan Swift and the wonderful postmodern art, not theory, postmodern art of Monty Python, Deadpool, even Shakespeare, utilized satire. It's a key component of the natural art that evolved alongside human beings. Postmodern theory subsumed it. Postmodern theory is Socialist Realism. It's the same thing. Even in the ways that they try to apply it to math. Even there. The problem is that if you approach this as literally as possible, you can't understand it. It's not a purely left hemisphered way of thinking. For those who know Ian McGilchrist, this is a key point, but it destroys one's ability to see anything that's not directly in front of it. It makes people very narrow, and this lack of connoisseurship is by design. And unfortunately, those of us who know this are not really qualified or up for the task, but we don't have a choice. So, sorry guys, you deserve someone a lot better, but you get me. Hopefully only for now. I'd like to pass this on like a baton. And until I do, I'm not going to stop. So we're going to start with a little bit of Abram Tertz. Let's listen to his lesson, or part of it. He writes, "What is socialist realism? What is the meaning of this strange and jarring phrase? Can there be a socialist, capitalist, Christian, or Mohammedan realism? Does this irrational concept have a natural existence? Perhaps it does not exist at all. Perhaps it is only the nightmare of a terrified intellectual during the dark and magical night of Stalin's dictatorship. Perhaps a crude propaganda trick of Zhdanov's or a senile fancy of Gorky's. Is it fiction, myth, or propaganda? Such questions, we are told, are often asked in the West. They are hotly debated in Poland. They are also current among us, where they arouse eager minds and tempting them into the heresies of doubt and criticism. Meanwhile, the productions of socialist realism are measured in billions of printed sheets, kilometers of canvas and film, centuries of hours. 1,000 critics, theoricians, art experts, pedagogues are beating their heads and straining their voices to justify, explain, and interpret its material existence and dialectical character. The head of state himself, the first secretary of the Central Committee, tears himself away from pressing economic tasks to pronounce some weighty words on the country's aesthetic problems. The most exact definition of socialist realism is given in a statute of the Union of Soviet Writers. Quote, "Socialist realism is the basic method of Soviet literature and literary criticism. It demands of the artist the truthful, historically concrete representation of reality in its revolutionary development. Moreover, the truthfulness and historical concreteness of the artistic representation of reality must be linked with the task of ideological transformation and education of workers in the spirit of socialism." First All-Union Congress of Soviet Writers, 1934, page 716. This innocent formula is the foundation on which the entire edifice of socialist realism was erected. It includes the link between socialist realism and the realisms of the past, as well as its new and distinguishing quality. The link lies in the truthfulness of the representation. The difference in the ability to seize the revolutionary development and to educate readers in accordance with that development, in the spirit of socialism. The old realists, or as they're sometimes called, critical realists, because they criticize bourgeois society, men like Balzac, Tolstoy, and Chekhov truthfully represented life as it is, but not having been introduced in the genius and teachings of Marx, they could not foresee the future victories of socialism, and they certainly did not know the real and concrete roads to these victories. The socialist realist, armed with the doctrine of Marx and enriched by the experience of struggles and victories, is inspired by the vigilant attention of his friend and teacher, the Communist Party. While representing the present, he listens to the march of history and looks towards the future. He sees the visible traits of communism, invisible to the ordinary eye. His creative work is a step forward from the art of the past, the highest peak of the artistic development of mankind, and the most realistic of realisms. Such, in few words, is the general scheme of our art. It is amazingly simple, yet sufficiently elastic to comprehend Gorky, Mayakovsky, Faddeev, Aragon, Ernenberg, and hundreds of others. But we cannot understand this concept at all, so long as we skim the surface of the dry formula and do not penetrate into its deep and hidden meaning. The gist of this formula: the truthful, historically concrete representation of reality in its revolutionary development is founded on the concept of purpose, with a capital P. The purpose is an all-embracing ideal toward which truthfully represented reality ascends in an undeviating revolutionary movement. To direct this movement toward its end, and to help the reader approach it more closely by transforming his consciousness. This is the purpose of socialist realism, the most purposeful art of our time. The purpose is communism, known in its early stage as socialism. A poet not only writes poems, but helps in his own way to build communism. So too do sculptors, musicians, agronomists, engineers, laborers, policemen, and lawyers, as well as theaters, machines, newspapers, and guns. Our art, like our culture and our society, is teleological through and through. It is subject to a higher destiny, from which it gains its title of nobility. In the final reckoning, we live only to speed the coming of communism. A tendency towards purpose is part of human nature. I extend my hand to receive the coins. I go to a movie to spend time with a pretty girl. I write a novel to earn glory and the gratitude of posterity. Each of my conscious moves is purposeful. Animals do not have such long-range instincts or intentions. Animals do not have such long-range intentions. They're moved by instincts. They bite to bite, and not for the purpose of biting. They don't think about tomorrow, wealth, God. They live without facing any complex problems, but man invariably wants what he has not got. This quality of our nature finds its outlet in a feverish activity. We transform nature into our own image and turn nature into an object. Aimless rivers become arteries of communication. Aimless trees become paper filled with destiny. Our abstract thought is no less teleological. Man explores the world by attributing to his own purposefulness. He asks, what is the use of the sun? And answers, to give light and heat. The animism of primitive peoples is the first attempt to conquer senseless chaos by endowing it with many aims and to animate the indifferent universe with a life useful to man. Science has not freed us from the childish questions of why. Behind the causal relations that it establishes, we find hidden and distorted purposefulness of natural phenomenon. Science says man descends from the monkey, instead of saying the destiny of the monkey is to become man. However man may have originated, his appearance and purpose are inseparable from God. That is, from the highest idea of purpose, which is accessible to us. if not through our understanding, then through our wish that there should be such a purpose. This is the final purpose of all that is, and of all that isn't, and is the infinite, and probably purposeless. Purpose in itself. For how could purpose have purposes? There are periods of history where the presence of purpose is evident. When minor passions are absorbed into the striving for God, and he openly calls mankind unto himself. Thus arose the culture of Christianity, which seized the purpose in what is perhaps its most inaccessible meaning. Then came the era of individualism, which proclaimed the freedom of the individual as the purpose and set about worshiping this purpose with the aid of the Renaissance, humanism, Superman, democracy, Robespierre, service, and other forms of worship. And now, we have entered into the era of a new worldwide system. The idea, and that idea of socialist purposefulness. A blinding light pours from the summit of thought. A world that we can imagine more material and better suited to human needs than Christian paradise. Thus was communism, defined by the Soviet writer, Leonid Leonov. Words fail us when we try to talk about it. We choke with enthusiasm as we use mostly negative comparisons to describe the splendor that is waiting for us. Then, under communism, there will be no rich and no poor, no money, wars, jails, frontiers, diseases, and maybe no death. Everybody will eat and work as much as he likes. And labor will bring joy instead of sorrow. As Lenin promised, we will all make toilets out of pure gold. But what am I talking about? What words and what colors are needed to describe these grandiose heights, where whores are as modest as virgins, and hangmen as tender as mothers? The modern mind cannot imagine anything more beautiful and splendid than the communist ideal. The best it can do is to restore to circulation old ideals of Christian love and liberty of the individual. But it has been unable, so far, to set up a new purpose. Where socialist realism is concerned, the Western liberal individualist, or Russian skeptical intellectual, is about in the same position as the cultured and intelligent Roman with regard to Christianity. He called the new faith of the crucified God barbarous and naive. Laughed over the lunatics who worshipped the cross, that Roman guillotine, and believed that the doctrines of the Trinity, the Immaculate Conception, the Resurrection, etc., made no sense whatsoever. But it was quite above his powers to advance any serious arguments against the ideal of Christ as such. True, he could say that the best parts of the moral code of Christianity were borrowed from Plato, just as contemporary Christians assert here and there that communism took its noble aims from the gospel. But could he say that the God conceived as love or goodness was evil or monstrous? And can we say that the universal happiness promised for the communist future is evil? We are helpless before the enchanting beauty of communism. We have not lived long enough to invent a new purpose and go beyond ourselves into the distance that is beyond communism. It was the genius of Marx that he proved the earthly paradise of which others had dreamed before him was actually the purpose which fate had destined for man. With the aid of Marx, communism passed from moral efforts of isolated individuals, oh, where were you, Golden Age, into the sphere of universal history, which became purposeful as never before, and turned into mankind's march toward communism. At once, everything fell into place. An iron necessity and a strict hierarchical order harnessed the flow of centuries. The ape stood up on its hind legs and began its triumphant march and procession towards communism. The system of primitive communism arose because it was fated to grow into slavery. Slavery to give birth to feudalism, feudalism to capitalism, and finally capitalism so it could give way to communism. That is all. The magnificent aim is achieved. The pyramid is crowned. History at an end. A truly religious person relates all the splendid variety of life to his divinity. He cannot understand another faith. He believes in the purpose so that he can despise other purposes. He shows the same fanaticism with regard to history. A consistent Christian views the entire history previous to the birth of Christ as the prehistory of Christ. From the point of view of the monotheist, the pagans existed only to call upon themselves the will of the only God and, after a suitable preparation, to become monotheists. It can therefore hardly surprise us that in other religious systems, ancient Rome has become an indispensable stage on the road to communism. Or that the Crusades are explained not by their internal dynamics, but by the ardent efforts of Christians. Or by the ardent efforts of Christians, but by the action of the omnipresent forces of production that are now ensuring the collapse of capitalism and the triumph of socialism. True faith is not compatible with tolerance. Neither is it compatible with historicism, i.e., with tolerance applied to the past. And though the Marxists call themselves historical materialists, their historicism is actually reduced to a desire to regard life as a march toward communism. Other movements are of little interest to them. Whether they are right or wrong is a matter of dispute. What is beyond dispute is that they are consistent. If we ask any Westerner why the French Revolution was necessary, we will receive a great many different answers. One will reply that it happened to save France. Another that it took place to lead the nation into an abyss of moral experiments. A third that it came to give the world the great principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity. A fourth, the French Revolution was not necessary at all. But you ask any Soviet schoolboy, to say nothing of the beneficiaries of our higher education, you will invariably receive the correct and exhaustive reply. The French Revolution was needed to clear the way for communism. The man who received a Marxist education knows the meaning of both past and future. He knows why this or that idea was needed, or why this event emperor or military leader was needed. It is a long time since men had such an exact meaning of the world's destiny. Not since the Middle Ages, most likely. It is our great privilege to possess this knowledge once more. The teleological nature of Marxism is most obvious in the works of his latest theories. They brought to Marxism the clarity, strength, and rigor of military orders and economic decrees. A good example is Stalin's judgment on the role of ideas, taken from the 4th chapter of the short course of history of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. There exist different ideas and different theories. There are old ideas and theories which have outlived their time and serve the interests of outdated forces of society. Their significance lies in their hampering the growth of the society and its forward march. There are also new, advanced ideas and theories which serve the interests of the advanced forces of society. Their significance lies in facilitating the growth of the society and its forward march. As long as its famous author lived, the short course was the bedside book of every Soviet citizen. The entire literate population was constantly urged to study it, and in particular its 4th chapter containing the quintessence of the Marxist creed and written by Stalin himself. A quotation from the novel The Great Highway illustrates the universal validity that was attached to the short course. Quote, Father Degradev brought in a small volume and said, everything is said here, in the 4th chapter. Ivanovich took the book and thought, there is no book on earth that contains everything that a man needs. But Ivanovich, a typical skeptical intellectual, soon realized that he was wrong and accepted Degradev's view, which was that of all advanced people. This book contains everything that a man needs. End quote. Every word of this quotation is pervaded by the spirit of purposefulness. Even the ideas that do not favor the movement towards the purpose have their destiny to hamper the movement toward purpose. Once, no doubt, the destiny of Satan. Idea, superstructure, base, law of nature, economics, forces of production, all these abstract and impersonal concepts suddenly come to life, are covered with flesh and blood, and become like gods and heroes, angels and devils. They create purposes. And suddenly, from the pages of philosophical treatises and scientific investigations, there resounds the voice of the great religious mystery. The base produces the superstructure so that it can serve the base. Joseph Stalin. Marxism and Linguistic Questions. This is not the only happy turn of phrase of Stalin's, which the author of the Bible might envy. The specific teleology of Marxist thought consists in leading all concepts and objects to the purpose, referring them all to the purpose, and defining them all through the purpose. The history of all epochs and nations is but the history of humanity's march toward communism. And the history of the world's thought happened, so to say, in order to bring forth scientific materialism, i.e. Marxism, i.e. the philosophy of communism. The history of philosophy, proclaims Zadanov, is the history of the birth and rise of communism. the development of the scientific worldview and its laws, is the rise of communism. As materialism grew and developed in the struggle against idealism, so the history of philosophy is the history of the struggle between materialism and idealism. Zadornov, in the discussion of History of Western European Philosophy, June 24th, 1947. His proud words. Seem like the voice of God himself, exclaiming, "The whole of history is my history. And since I assert myself in the struggle with Satan, world history is also the history of my struggle with Satan." And so it rises before us, the sole purpose of all creation, as splendid as eternal life and as compulsory as death. And we fling ourselves toward it, breaking all barriers and rejecting anything that might hamper our frantic course. We free ourselves without regret from belief in an afterlife, from love of our neighbor, from freedom of the individual and other prejudices. By now, rather shop-worn and looking all the sorrier by comparison with the great ideal before us, thousands of martyrs of the revolution gave up their lives for the new religion and surpassed the first Christians in their sufferings, their steadfastness and their holiness. Polish commanders branded our backs with 5-pointed stars. Molotov's bands buried us alive up to our necks, and the Japanese burned us in fireboxes of locomotives and poured lead into our mouths. They all roared, abjure, but from our burning throats, only 3 words came: long live communism. Bukowski. To our new God, we sacrificed not only our lives, our blood, and our bodies, but we also sacrificed our snow-white soul, after staining it with all the filth of the world. It is fine to be gentle, to drink tea with preserves, to plant flowers and cultivate love, non-resistance to evil, and other philanthropies. But whom did they save? And what did they exchange? What did they change in this world? These ancient virgins of both sexes. These egoists of humanism who brought themselves an easy conscience, penny by penny, and rented themselves a cozy corner in the heavenly almshouses. We do not want salvation for ourselves, but for all of humanity. Instead of sentimental sighs, individual perfection, and amateur dramatics for the benefit of the hungry, we set about to correct the universe according to the best of models, the shining model of the purpose which we approached ever more closely. So that prisons should vanish forever, we built new prisons. So that all frontiers would fall, we surrounded ourselves with a Chinese wall. So that work should become a rest and a pleasure, we introduced forced labor. So that not one more drop of blood be shed anymore, we killed and killed and killed. In the name of the purpose, we turned to the means that our enemies used. We glorified Imperial Russia. We wrote lies in Pravda. We set a new czar on the now empty throne. We introduced officers, epaulates, and tortures. Sometimes we felt the only sacrifice left was needed for the triumph of communism, and that was the renunciation of communism. Oh Lord, pardon us our sins. Finally, it was created. Our world in the image and likeness of God. It is not yet communism, but it is already quite close to communism, and so we rise, stagger with weariness, encircle the earth with bloodshot eyes, and do not find around us what we hope to find. Why do you laugh, scum? Why do you claw with your well-cared-for nails the spots of blood and dirt that have stuck to our jackets and uniforms? You say that this is not communism? That we took the wrong turning and that we are farther from communism now than when we started? Well, then where is your kingdom of God? Show it. Where is the free personality of the Superman that you promised? Achievements are never identical with the original aim. The means used to reach the aim change its original appearance into something quite unrecognizable. The stakes of the Inquisition helped to establish the gospel. But what is left of the gospel after the stakes have done their work? Yet all of them, the stakes of the Inquisition and the gospel, the massacre of St. Bartholomew and St. Bartholomew himself, add up to one great Christian culture. Yes, we live in communism. It resembles our aspirations about as much as the Middle Ages resembled Christ. Modern man resembles the free Superman, and man resembles God. But all the same, there is some resemblance, isn't there? This resemblance lies in the subordination of all our actions, thoughts, and longings to that sole purpose, which may have long ago become a meaningless word, but still it has a hypnotic effect on us and pushes us onward and onward. We don't know where, and obviously art and literature could not but get caught in the meshes of that system and become, as Lenin predicted, a small wheel and small screw of the gigantic state machine. Quote, our magazines, both scientific and artistic, cannot be apolitical. The strength of Soviet literature, the most advanced in the world, is that it is a literature for which there can be no other interests than those of the people and of the state. Decree of the Central Committee by the CPSU, August 14th, 1946. Unquote. It must be remembered when reading this decree of the Central Committee that the interests of the people and of the state, which incidentally are exactly the same from the point of view of the state, that have a single aim: the all-pervading and all-absorbing communism. Quote, literature and art are part of the whole people's struggle for communism. The highest social destiny of art and literature is to mobilize the people to the struggle for new advances in the building of communism. And Khrushchev for a close link between literature and art and the life of the people. Communist Magazine, number 12, 1957. End quote. When Western writers deplore our lack of freedom of speech, their starting point is their belief in the freedom of the individual. This is the foundation of their culture. But it is organically alien to communism. A Soviet writer, a true Soviet writer, a true Marxist, will not accept these approaches and will not even know what they're all about. What freedom, if the comparison be permitted, does the religious person require from God? The freedom to praise God still more ardently? Contemporary Christians who have broken their spiritual fast and accepted the spirit of individualism with its free elections, free enterprise, and free press occasionally abuse the phrase freedom of choice that Christ is supposed to have bequeathed us. It sounds like a dubious borrowing from the parliamentary system to which they are accustomed, for it bears no resemblance to the kingdom of God. If only because no president or prime minister is ever elected in paradise. Even the most liberal God offers only one freedom of choice: to believe or not to believe, to be for him or for Satan, to go to paradise or to hell. Communism offers just about the same right. If you don't want to believe, you can go to jail. Which, by no means, is worse than hell. And for the man who believes, for the Soviet writer to whom communism is the purpose of his own and humanity's existence, and otherwise there is no place for him either in our literature or our society, there can be no such dilemma. For the man who believes in communism, as Khrushchev correctly noted in one of his latest cultural pronouncements, quote, "For the artist who truly wants to serve his people, the question does not arise of whether he is free or not in his creative work. For him, the question of which approach to the phenomenon of reality to choose is clear. He need not conform or force himself. The true representation of life from the point of view of communist partnernost, the point of view that considers everything in terms of the correct party line, is a necessity for his soul. He holds firmly to these positions and affirms and defends them in his work." End quote. It is with the same joyous facility that this artist accepts the directives of the party and the government from the Central Committee and its first secretary. For who, if not the party and its leader, knows best what kind of art we need? It is, after all, the party that leads us to the purpose. In accordance with all the rules of Marxism, Leninism, the party that lives and works in constant contact with God. And so we, in it, and in its leaders, the wisest and most experienced guide who is competent in all questions of industry, linguistics, music, philosophy, painting, biology, etc., he is our commander, our ruler, our high priest. To doubt his word is as sinful as to doubt the will of God. These are the aesthetic and psychological concepts, the knowledge of which is indispensable to anyone who would penetrate the secret of socialist realism. I'm going to stop there. Now we're going to jump over to Mao for a moment. There's one more chapter to that, but this is why I want somebody else to read it, because it upsets me a lot. Mao Zedong talks at the Yenan Forum on Literature and Art. Foreign Language Press, Peking, 1967. First edition was 1956. Printed in the People's Republic of China. The present English translation of talks at the Yenan Forum on Literature and Art has been made from the Chinese text given in the Selected Works of Mao Tse-Tung, Volume 3, published by the People's Publishing House, Peking, in May 1953. Comrades, you have been invited to this forum today to exchange ideas and examine the relationship between the work in the literary and artistic fields and revolutionary work in general. Our aim is to ensure that revolutionary literature and art follow the correct path of development and provide better help to other revolutionary work in facilitating the overthrow of our national enemy and the accomplishment of the task of national liberation. In our struggle for the liberation of the Chinese people, there are various fronts, among which there are the fronts of the pen and of the gun, the cultural and the military fronts. To defeat the enemy, we must rely primarily on the army with guns. But this army alone is not enough. We must also have a cultural army, which is absolutely indispensable for uniting our own ranks and defeating the enemy. Since the May 4th movement, such a cultural army has taken shape in China. And it's helped the Chinese Revolution, gradually reduced the domain of China's feudal culture and of the comprador culture, which serves imperialist aggression, and weakened their influence. To oppose the new culture, the Chinese reactionaries can now only pit quantity against quality. In other words, reactionaries have money, and though they can produce nothing good, they can go all out and produce it in quantity. Literature and art have been an important, successful part of the cultural front since the May 4th movement. During the 10 years Civil War, the revolutionary literature and art movement grew greatly. That movement and the Revolutionary War both headed in the same general direction, but these two fraternal armies were not linked together in their practical work because the reactionaries had cut them off from each other. It is very good that since the outbreak of the War of Resistance against Japan, more and more revolutionary writers and artists have been coming to Yenan and our other anti-Japanese base areas. But it does not necessarily follow that having come to the base areas, that they have already integrated themselves completely with the masses of people here. The two must be completely integrated if we are to push ahead with our revolutionary work. The purpose of our meeting today is precisely to ensure that literature and art fit well into the whole revolutionary machine, as a component part, that they operate as powerful weapons for uniting and educating the people, and for attacking and destroying the enemy, and that they help the people fight the enemy with one heart and one mind. What are the problems that must be solved to achieve this objective? I think they are the problems of the class stand of the writers and artists, their attitude, their audience, their work, and their study. Then he breaks down about attitude as who to extol and who to expose, how to destroy the audiences. Goes on and on and on and on, but I'm going to jump a little later, and I will share more of this one day. But he says, "Comrades, our forum has had 3 meetings this month. In the pursuit of truth, we have carried on spirited debates in which scores of party and non-party comrades have spoken, laying bare the issues and making them more concrete. This, I believe, will very much benefit the whole literary and artistic movement. In discussing a problem, we should start from reality and not from definitions. We would be following a wrong method if we first looked up definitions of literature and art in textbooks and then used them to determine the growing principles for the present-day literary and artistic movements, and to judge the different opinions and controversies that arise today. We are Marxists. And Marxism teaches that in our approach to a problem, we should start from objective facts, not from abstract definitions. And that we should derive our guiding principles, policies, and measures from an analysis of these facts. We should do the same in our present discussion of literary and artistic work. What are the facts at present? The facts are the war of resistance against Japan, which China has been fighting for 5 years, the worldwide anti-fascist war, the facilitation of China's big landlord class and big bourgeois in the war of resistance and their policy of high-handed oppression of the people, the revolutionary movement in literature and art since the May 4th movement, its great contributions to the revolution during the last 23 years and its many shortcomings, the anti-Japanese democratic base areas of the 8th Route and the new 4th armies, and the integration of large numbers of writers and artists with these armies, and with the workers and peasants in these areas. The difference in both environment and tasks between the writers and artists in the base areas and those in the Kuomintang areas, and the controversial issue concerning literature and art, which has arisen in Yenan and other anti-Japanese base areas. These are the actual, undeniable facts, in the light of which we have to consider our problems. What then is the crux of the matter? In my opinion, it consists fundamentally of the problems of working for the masses and how to work for the masses. Unless these two problems are solved properly, our writers and artists will be ill-adapted to their environment, and their tasks will come up against a series of difficulties from without and within. My concluding remarks will center on these two problems and also touch on some related ones. The first problem is literature and art for whom This problem was solved years ago, long ago, by Marxists, especially by Lenin. As far back as 1905, Lenin pointed out emphatically that our literature and art should, quote, serve the millions and tens of millions of working people. For comrades engaged in literary and artistic work in the anti-Japanese base areas, it might seem that this problem is already solved and needs no further discussion. Actually, that is not the case. Many comrades have not found a clear solution. Consequently, their sentiments, their works, their actions, and their views on the guiding principles for literature and art have inevitably been more or less at variance with the needs of the masses and of the practical struggle. Of course, among the numerous men of culture, writers, artists, and other literary and artistic workers engaged in the great struggle for liberation, together with the Communist Party and the English Eighth Route and the new Fourth Armies, a few may be careerists, who are with us only temporarily. But the overwhelming majority are working energetically for the common cause. By relying on these comrades, we have achieved a great deal in our literature, drama, music, and fine arts. Many of these writers and artists have begun their work since the outbreak of the War of Resistance. Many others did much revolutionary work before the war, endured many hardships, and influenced broad masses of the people by their activities and works. Why do we say, then, that even among these comrades there are some who have not reached a clear solution of the problem of whom literature and art are for? It is conceivable that there are still some who maintain that revolutionary literature and art are not for the masses of people, but are for the exploiters and oppressors. Indeed, literature and art exist, which are for the exploiters and oppressors. Literature and art for the landlord class are feudal literature and art. Such were the literature and art of the ruling class in China's feudal era. To this day, such literature and art still have considerable influence in China. Literature and art for the bourgeois are bourgeois literature and art. People like Liang Shichu, whom Lu Xun criticized, talk about literature and art as transcending the classes, but in fact, they uphold bourgeois literature and art and oppose proletarian literature and art. Then, literature and art exist which serve the imperialists. For example, the works of Chu Zhou-zhen and Zhang Zuping and their like, which we call traitor literature and art. With us, literature and art are for the people, not for any of the above groups. We have said that China's new culture at the present stage is an anti-imperialist, anti-feudal culture of the masses, of the people under the leadership of the proletariat. Today, anything that is truly of the masses must necessarily be led by the proletariat. Whatever is under the leadership of the bourgeois cannot possibly be of the masses. Naturally, the same applies to the new literature and art which are part of the new culture. We should take over the rich legacy of the good traditions in literature and art that have been handed down from the past ages in China and foreign countries. But the aim must still be to serve the masses of people. Nor do we refuse to utilize the literary and artistic forms of the past. But in our hands, these old forms, remolded and infused with new content, also becomes something revolutionary in the service of the people. Remember, please, Mao was a poet, and his wife was a dancer, and those dancing nurses remember, too, that Ibsen, the playwright, in 1888, wrote a play that is so powerful that when it was performed in 2018 in Shanghai, the audiences stood up and screamed for freedom of the individual. So they shut it down. That same play is right now on Broadway. and Mao is very happy with how they changed that ending. They removed the individual entirely. Again, the hero has to be toil. Capital T. Okay, purpose. And the toiler is unthinkable outside the collective. That's the basic formula. That's the spell. Little side note, in 1929, if you look it up, it's going to blow your mind. It wasn't the name Marx that was the most influential person in China when the Chinese were asked, who are you most influenced by? And the people were really asked. It was Ibsen. Mao then continues and says, having settled the problem on whom to serve, we come to the next problem, how to serve. To put in the words of some of our comrades, should we devote ourselves to raising standards, or should we devote ourselves to popularization? In the past, some comrades, to a certain or even a serious extent, belittled and neglected popularization and laid undue stress on raising standards. Stress should be laid on raising standards, but to do so one-sidedly and exclusively, to do so excessively, is a mistake. The lack of a clear solution to the problem of for whom, which I referred to earlier, also manifests itself in this connection. As these comrades are not clear on the problem of for whom, they have no correct criteria for the raising of standards, and thus popularization they speak of, and they are naturally still less able to find the correct relationship between the two. Ooh, nice hair there, Juana. 2 seconds. See, this is why I shouldn't be doing this. Makes me nervous. Anyway. I'm going to share a little side note with all of you guys real fast. The head of Columbia Drama grad school, name was Shaban, a Romanian, quit Columbia in 2000 and I can't remember if it was 18 or 19, maybe it was a little bit earlier, saying that he was leaving because he knew communism when he saw it. The story around it is that he refused to, when they had to fill a position in the theater department, he refused to follow it had to be a black or brown woman or gender nonconforming. He wouldn't do it. But more importantly, during an audition, someone came in and claimed to be transgendered and auditioned with Juliet. And he dared to ask them why they would choose that particular character. Shaban left, and you can find interviews in Romania of him saying that he went through this once, he's not doing it again. Understand also that when we're talking about the arts, you cannot just think about the popular or fine arts, but also remember there is an art to most, if not everything. The separation of the two of them is another example of theory, and the separation of art and science and philosophy. They're not separate things. There is no STEM v art. It doesn't exist. This may trouble some people who don't understand this, but you don't have to understand something for it to be true. Also, you don't have to be great at every element of it. It's just true. There's an art to medicine, as we've now come to realize, I hope. He goes on, he says, this question of for whom is fundamental. It is a question of principle. The controversies and divergences, the opposition and disunity arising among some comrades in the past were not on this fundamental question of principle, but on secondary questions or even on issues involving no principle. On this question of principle, however, there has been hardly any divergence among the two contending sides, and they have shown almost complete agreement. To some extent, both tend to look down upon the workers, peasants and soldiers, and divorce themselves from the masses. I say to some extent because, generally speaking, these comrades do not look down upon the workers, peasants, and soldiers, or divorce themselves from the masses in the same way the Kuomintang does. Nevertheless, the tendency is there. Unless this fundamental problem is solved, many other problems will not be easy to solve. Take, for instance, the sectarianism in literature and literary and art circles. This, too, is a question of principle, but sectarianism can only be eradicated by putting forward and faithfully applying the slogans for the workers and the peasants, for the 8 root, and new Fourth Armies, and go among the masses. Otherwise, the problem of sectarianism can never be solved. I mention this because slogans, if you think going back to, say, the Hogwarts idea. You can imagine if you're casting a spell, that the root of it is contained in an idea that is beyond the thing you say. So why does somebody say, workers of the world unite? Or why does someone say, Black Lives Matter? Or why does someone say, trans women are women? Trans women are women? It's bad magic, man. It's bad art. But it is art. And it's not as simple. I'm going to stop here, but I'm going to say that... Oh, here's one. I'm going to have to wait on this. I'm sorry. That just upsets me too much. But I'm just going to tell people that there's a book by the director, Peter Brook. It's called The Empty Space. Peter Brook knew Meyerhold, who is the root of my training. And Meyerhold was one of the first victims of the purges. And he had stood up and said, and he had been a party member, he said that by hunting formalism, which is what they called anything that wasn't socialism, this is 1928, I think, that he said, by hunting formalism, you were destroying art. Meyerhold was beloved and was personal friends with Molotov and never imagined for a moment that he couldn't speak his mind. Well, they stabbed his wife somewhere between 11 and 14 times, I can't remember the exact number, gouged out her eyes, arrested him, tortured him, forced him to confess, and then executed him by firing squad. In the CCP, there's a concept called killing the chicken to scare the monkey. Wei Wei, the artist, talks about this, that this is what censorship is really all about. That you can't even remember what the thread is, you just have that thread all the time. And that's what Solzhenitsyn tries to talk about when he talks about living not by lies, and that's what Vaclav Havel talks about when he's trying to talk about power of the powerless. We're talking about writers and artists here. Mao was a poet, his wife a dancer. The arts is not trivial, and it's also not shallow, and it's also not lowbrow, and it's also not any less difficult in study than any other more respectable form now. Go back in history, Charlie Bell, the painter who couldn't get into art school, went to medical school, and we now have the term Bell's palsy from it. So this is not, historically, I'm not saying this to be snotty or proud. I'm saying this because to understand this is vital. You need to understand this. And it's not about the academy. It's not about academia alone. It's, that's another expression of the Kant of consensus. Art, like science, is a process of looking for truth. Bad science and bad art have a very, very strong connection. And people not understanding this stuff is not I don't think it's a bug, it's a feature of where we are, and Americans especially, because we were so gifted with some of the core principles and core ideas that made this bad magic impenetrable. But we're vulnerable now, very. I've proposed that we recognize that Social realism is not organic, it's not real, it's artificial as trying to say that, strawberry flavored, squirt pops or whatever is natural. It's not. Postmodern art was natural. It emerged. You just had a bunch of artists that saw it and pointed to it. By postmodern art, what I mean is the same elements that are in Shakespeare, that are in Deadpool. Something the fourth wall drops, it's self-referential, and it's populist. Simpsons, Rick and Morty, a lot of other animations, a lot of comedy, all have postmodern art elements. Then postmodern theory swooped in, which was just basically social realism in sheep's clothing, and tried to obliterate it with all its other theories. And we've been sort of stuck in that loop. And now they're trying to claim metamodernism as a thing. There were artists in Romania that were creating something they called romantic surrealism, which is a beautiful opposition word to social realism. There's romantic surrealism. I've been trying to call it maybe supra-humanism. I see people now starting to talk about how authenticity is really important, but please be careful. Authentically social realist is a thing. You have to be very... I don't know exactly the answer, but I do know that some people say things like absurdity is so important. Vaclav Havel talks about this. I would say be cautious, but more than anything, be human and demand human traits and don't ever conflate optimism with hope. That's what social realism does. Hope is a very different thing. It's just like I'm doing right now. I'm hoping that this makes a difference, but anyway, I have no idea. I've been trying for a long time. I just can't stop doing it because I can't stop doing it, and regardless of how it turns out. That's what Vaclav Havel described as hope, and I'm urging everyone to understand this, because there is no way you can defeat. It's like trying to defeat Voldemort with political decrees in, Muggle territory. I can't believe I'm using a Harry Potter reference, but maybe it also helps explain why J.K. Rowling understood certain things so intuitively. And maybe the myths help us. And there's other myths out there that help. They already exist. We don't have to make new ones. They're there. They've been lost. A lot of ancient Greek myth. And I dare say, learning a little about the history of the arts, like clowns are different than buffoons. Clowns tell the truth. We need that. The target of Drag Queen Story Hour wasn't simply our children. It was actual drag itself, which was clowning. And we've lost a lot of artists and a lot of connoisseurship and a lot of audiences and a lot of our cities very recently. We are in a very precarious spot. Very. So, I hope this helped. Any advice on how to make it quicker or better, I will listen to it. I'm not looking at the comments right now, but I'll look later, and I'm more than happy to continue reading that, but I gotta stop now because I really need a hug, to be honest. Little background on me. I went to Tisch School of the Arts, graduated in 2000. I studied experimental theater and classical theater. I have loved the arts forever. I just do. It's one of those things. I had to leave New York because I couldn't get the vaccine and I couldn't go into a theater. or the museums, and for me, it was bad, it was unimaginable. And it also triggered, I guess, an epigenetic memory of some kind, because my family's from Hungary on my mother's side. My grandfather were Jews, but we were able to flee, and my mom was born in 41. Her older brother, my grandfather, was nobility. He was a baron, and his family was ennobled under Franz Josef. He was a member of the Austrian army. He was a hussar. We weren't all shtetls and that's not the truth. The play Leopoldstadt by Tom Stoppard depicted this very well, but there's very few of us left. To be completely blunt, because, not only were somewhere around 600,000 Hungarian Jews slaughtered in 3 weeks, then Stalin got a lot of us too. And people like my mom, who are in her 80s, it's hard. And people like me, well, I got nothing to lose. Except now I do, because I found a wonderful man that I love very much. But that's kind of motivating me all the more, because he's not part of the academic, literature, intellectual world, and I couldn't give a crying fuck what those people think of me. But as for kindred, I'm desperately kind of looking for you guys, if you're out there and you hear this, because we have work to do. I hate to tell you, there is no cavalry coming. We are not ready for it. We are not trained for it. We are not as good as they are, but it's got to get done. And I don't care about recognition or anything. I really couldn't care less. I just really hope that we find a way to explain this stuff, because it's hypnotic. It gets into it destroys your spirit and your soul in ways. You can compare it, if you want, to a religion, because this is another religion. And the arts is one of those things that I've always it's like a stream that flows above it all. I'm not saying better than, it's supra to it. And a lot of people who don't understand that are going after certain things that don't make sense, and then tolerating mediocrity. And I'll leave you with this, because I'm so desperate to be heard, but I know it's not going to happen. I'll leave you with this, a poem by Charles Bukowski. And I have this on my YouTube as /OOANA. I don't care to subscribe to it. I really don't care. I'm glad I don't make money on this. It would creep me out. Seriously. But I do need to find a way to make something. By the way, frankly, right now it's getting bad. So if anybody has a lead out there, I'm all ears. Sorry, I'm not good at that, but it's not what this is. Forget that. Life, man. But Bukowski, the poet, he said, he was born in Weimar, into Germany. And by the way, the reality under Weimar has completely been obliterated too. Queer theory is not gay history. It's not the history of Weimar. Queer theory's goal is actually to eliminate everything queer or different. Remember, it's everyone's adherence and conformity to the communal aim, which is the spread of revolution throughout the world. By the way, it never ends either. It's hell on earth. My grandfather, the day before they were going to go to Palestine, as it was called on the map before it was Israel, and a place that was always historically Israel. In a spiritual Zionist sense, not a socialist Zionist sense, I'm saying this. They were going to go, and the day before, my grandfather was turned in by somebody who had built something for their coach car to hide their belongings in the walls, and put him in the Black Valley Gulag. And then he was in Pitesh. And if you want to know what that is, you can listen to Daryl Cooper's Martyr Maids episode on anti-humans, but I highly suggest and advise you to be cautious after that. He's gone to the dark place. But the goal of that place was an experiment to prove that a person is nothing more than reactive meat sacks and useful eaters. Maybe there's an epigenetic memory here. We're And that's what art's supposed to do. Art is supposed to show that, I guess, we're like God, but small. Creatively, but small. Very small. And so Bukowski said this about the genius of the crowd, he called it. He said, there's enough, I hope I remember it, I'm a little emotional, but I have a bit of an idiot savant memory for words. That's why I was in the theater world. So, said, there is enough hate, treachery, violence, and absurdity in the average human being to supply any given army on any given day. And the best at murder are those who preach against it. And the best at hate are those who preach love. And the best at war are those who preach peace. Those who preach God need God. Those who preach peace do not have peace. Those who preach love do not have love. Beware the preachers. Beware the knowers. Beware those who are always reading books. Beware those who detest poverty or are proud of it. Beware those who need constant crowds, for they are nothing alone. Beware the average man, the average woman. Beware their love. Their love is average, seeks average, but there is genius in their hatred. There is enough genius in their hatred to kill you, to kill anybody. Not wanting solitude, not understanding solitude. They will attempt to destroy anything that differs from their own. Unable to create art, they will not understand art. They will see their failure as creators only as a failure of the world. Unable to love fully, they will see your love as incomplete. And then they will hate you. And their hatred will be perfect. Like a shining diamond. Like a tiger. Like a knife. Like a mountain. Like hemlock. Their finest art. So, remember, the hero is not toil. And certainly, even when you do toil, you are not unthinkable outside the collective. Not just unimaginable, they say unthinkable. Fucking psychos, man. But it's addictive. And it's tricky. And it works. So, you know, it was super fun. It's going to sound really silly, but if you're on TikTok, and yeah, I'm sending you a TikTok for a second. There's some really nifty little things, some good news. There's a kid who shares like what it would look like if Beethoven dropped a track today. There's a cute trend that I really liked that was called the Beckham Challenge, which was just a couple dancing together. You know, keep it funny. Have fun. L'chaim. And, play with some art. Tell something true. Make something true. Just be true. Make it true. However that is. Art for art's sake is bullshit. Art is beautiful. And as Mary Oliver said, we need beauty because it makes us yearn to be worthy of it. But a lot of politicians out there, not even politicians, I dare say it has nothing to do with politicians, start looking at the marketing. That's my advice. Who's marketing this? Those companies. What agencies are doing the delivery mechanism stuff? And remember who's worse, the monster or the monster that delivers the monster? It's prey. Don't let them convince you that all human beings are animals. Especially in relation to this latest self-realist narrative, which is an extension of what began 4 years ago, and that's October 7th. We are essential. We are all, each one of us is essential. And we have to choose each other over and over again, sometimes despite one another. And please, 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 please don't fall into the hero is toil and the toiler is unthinkable outside the collective, because it's not fair or good to the individuals who are being used as fodder and a tool for this purpose. And don't conflate very old stories with this new one that is always socialist. Because even if it's got a loud voice, it is utter stupidity, and stupid, as my mom says, never wins. But it does make a mess. So, thanks for listening. I hope this helps. Please share it if it does. If you've got any, steal it, download it, do whatever you want. I don't care. Spread the word if you like any of it, and if you want me to do it another way. But I just do this once in a while when the impulse strikes me. Maybe one day you'll actually see me done up again. I don't know. But I'm gonna have to do something about this, though. It's not just the furrowed brow. It's I'm tired. So, the books again that I read from for now was this one. It was 50 cents in San Francisco once. Yeah, and this one is harder to find, and there's a few other versions of it. There's a version that's actually has the introduction by Czeslaw Milosz, and it also includes the same stuff, but it's soft copy, and it's kind of reversed order. And anybody who finds any of this interesting, if they want to ever collaborate, damn straight, let's do it. I'll give you my phone number. Come down to Madeira Beach. Brainstorm, find a way. Something. But it's hard out there. Even a play I tried to put on last year fell apart because there's a lot of new challenges now. That even the people who are trained in this stuff, we have no idea. So, and most people are not like me, where they don't have any bridges left to burn. I don't even look at them as bridges to burn, because kind of look at them like they're already on fire. You know, I'm trying to say, get off the other side of that bridge, man. I don't know. But as for New Yorkers, if there are any New Yorkers listening, it's up to you. Make it there, we can make it anywhere. Ciao from the New York diaspora, and anybody in Germany or Europe that want to talk about this stuff, I could use some help too. Americans really need a little quick study on a lot of this. They've got to go. We have to grow up really quick. We need your help, I think, personally. So, toodles. And one more thing is sonnet that I was taught back in the day when I was learning all this stuff, and I never knew why, but it's the same one that Pasternak had everyone say, and it's sonnet number 30. He says, "When to the sessions of sweet silent thought, I summon up remembrance of things past. I sigh the lack of many a thing I sought, and with old woes new wail my dear time's waste. Then can I drown an eye, unused to flow for precious friends hid in death's stateless night, and weep afresh love's long since cancelled woe, and worry afresh many a vanished sight. Then can I grieve at grievances forgone, and heavily from woe to woe tell o'er the sad account of for bemoaned moan, which I knew pay, as if not pay before. But if the while I think on thee, dear friends, all losses are restored, and sorrows end." He wrote that while being in lockdown. King Lear, Macbeth, and Winter's Tale too. Haha. Just saying. Over and out. Keep the ghost light on, people.